Welcome, welcome everyone. Very nice to see you all today. Welcome, beautiful sunny day. At least it is here in Stratford. Welcome, welcome. As soon as everyone has joined us, we'll just give another moment. We will get started. And again, if you do not wish to be caught on camera, that's up to you. Please turn off your camera. We are now recording and will continue until the end of the presentation. Hello, everyone. Welcome from all over the country today. That's very nice. And please remain muted through the presentation. We will get to questions, absolutely. When we get to questions, you can either raise your hand, use your virtual hand as preferred, or use the chat and I will read your question. All right, we'll get formally started in just a moment, just letting everyone join us. Right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Betty Ann Hedges, the Executive Director of Humanists Canada. As always, this recording will be available after the event on all of our various platforms. We are recording live on March 24th, 2024. I am very pleased today to introduce Dr. Rita Deverell. I heard Dr. Deverell speak last month, and I felt her experience and voice was exactly what we need right now. She has a history of finding authentic ways to truly communicate. In our various roles, officiants, writing meaningful celebrations for an audience of people we don't know, or as writers, podcasters, and programmers, our members wear many hats. We need to find that unique way of cutting through and truly communicating. Dr. Deverell, thank you for joining us on this sunny Sunday.
Thank you for inviting me. I think I've managed to unmute myself. You hear me? This is good. And thank you for the introduction. Some of this communication comes from things that have gone wrong, as well as things that have gone right. I should perhaps locate myself a bit geographically. At this moment, I'm in Toronto, having borrowed my family's desk. But normally, more normally, I am near Aurelia in the territory of the Three Fires Confederacy. I will acknowledge that is the Odawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi tribes. And that is the location of Lakehead University, closest to me in Aurelia, and their land acknowledgement. So I will acknowledge that at this moment. As you may or may not have suspected, however, I was not born there. And I will say just a little bit about where I was born, which is in the Houston, Texas Negro Hospital in 1945. That means I grew up in the same Black ghetto as George Floyd, and we went to the same high school, although I was there 40 years earlier. When the George Floyd murder happened and the discovery of the unmarked graves in BC, I immediately got catapulted into doing a whole bunch of diversity, equity, inclusion, and decolonization training. That for sure has not been my business, but it seems to have become part of my business since those two events. To share one thing, though, that happened at Lakehead, or at least I related this to a Lakehead convocation. It is that about 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I was at church in Toronto, and the musician, the organist, decided to play for the postlude the War March of the Priest, which I had not heard in years and years and years, and my ears immediately perked up. And the reason was that piece of music was frequently used at convocations at Texas Southern University. Texas Southern was the Black university in Houston and walking distance of my home. Also across the street from the public housing units where George Floyd lived. Um, and I heard this piece of music, and it took me back to going to many convocations when I was a child. So we could walk from, as I say, my home to the university. But hearing this so many years later, I thought, why were my parents taking me to convocations when I didn't know anybody who was graduating? And they were literally taking me by the hand as an 8-year-old, a 9-year-old to these convocations. Um, there was wonderful music, including the War March of the Priest. There were spectacular robes and frequently a very good speech. So the conclusion that I came to, thinking about this with a huge gap and my parents no longer being in this world, to ask them was that they were telling me that this was my only destination, that my choice was to be present at convocations, and that education was highly significant. It therefore was significant to me when the university, which, as I said, was right across the street from where George Floyd lived, but he didn't have the opportunity to cross that street. That didn't happen to him. And so when the university's Board of Governors made an all expenses paid scholarship to his 6-year-old daughter, should she wish to take it up when she got to be university age. I thought that was a very moving and appropriate and effective gesture, a very big and appropriate gesture. Whether I've solved the mystery of why my parents were taking me to convocations or not, I don't know. But I think that explanation works for me. So the reason I told you that story, which I'm sure will be quite transparent to you, is I think in talking about in officiating at rituals, it's important to share something that means a lot to you, that authentically means a lot to you in terms of ritual. So it doesn't need to be the exact same ritual or ceremony, but it needs to have some significance, some hook in with who you are so that you are sharing it with the people who are present in the room. I also think that's true with any kind of communication. And when you share that thing that has some significance to you, it tends to reach other people. So, Martin, stand by with these two video clips. I'm almost there. Um, Another thing, many of you will know that I spent a significant amount of time being the vice president of production at Vision TV, which was the world's first multi-faith and multicultural television network. It is to my regret, in fact, since that kind of communication is needed now more than ever, that Vision became, it evolved, it was sold so that it was no longer a not-for-profit charity, but was a publicly traded company. But that's a whole other concern, and part of my concern about broadcasting in Canada, another concern. However, this meant that I had all the fun of building production teams that were as diverse as possible. Diverse by faith or no faith, diverse by age, ethnicity, language, background, however you wanted to define that. I don't mean that I was able to achieve a kind of Noah's Ark, two of each. My teams weren't that big, but they were highly intercultural. And part of what that meant is that we had to be able to talk with each other. So, yes, let's look, Martin, at this first clip, which is about the history of Vision TV.
The vision of Vision was for a multicultural, multi-faith dialogue. And that it started, we put it on the air in September 1, 1988. And I think Canada generally was trying to come to grips with immigration and the colorization of our population, if you will. And some people weren't totally satisfied with that. They were worried about that. And I hope, I don't know what the impact was, of course, but the hope would have been that the influence of Vision helped people come to grips with that, because that was what Vision was about.
Our distinctiveness is underlined through uncommon programming. As you become familiar with our schedule, you'll begin to notice the human dimension.
There was every reason for me to become involved with Vision TV. Obvious. I will start with what may be the most obvious. Working in the communications industry, and a woman is not an easy
working
thing.
in the communications
industry
of color
is not an easy thing.
And we're talking
people of
some
color
time
and
ago.
for women. It's gotten
And
only
we're talking
marginally
some
easier
time ago.
now. It's gotten only
but at that
marginally
point,
easier
now.
I knew.
But at
if
that
I
point,
wanted someplace
I
for
knew.
people who looked
If
like
I
me
wanted
to
someplace,
I
for
would have to
people
build
who
it.
looked
like me to work. I would have to build it.
And now, Martin, thank you very much for your technical assistance. We can look at the second clip.
Vision TV existed to deal with multi-faith dialogue. And there is perhaps nothing more important than multi-faith dialogue, that people who are not like each other, instead of shooting each other, can cooperate on some things and get along. So I thought that was a very important mission.
1 in every 10 Canadian women is beaten by her partner. And that raises an interesting question about every 10 men passing by.
Violence against women is, I think, still not being reported as much as it's actually taking place. There's a lot more out there.
The service intention was to be an intelligence service that people could think about, that they could think about the programs, and not people fighting each other, but intelligent conversation. I mean, Rita's series of talk shows were that. There was nobody fighting each other on those programs. It was intelligent talk, and intelligent talk in the sense of really trying to get at deep issues. And that's very difficult. It's very difficult just sitting around, let alone on television. And let alone on television, it needs to have an audience. Because Vision needed to have audiences as well as intelligent programming. So that's always been the challenge faced by anybody that wants to produce quality programming or broadcast quality programming or schedule quality programming that is thoughtful. That's why there's so little of it now.
Thank you. Since that second clip referenced violence and women, I had many experiences that were formative, really, while putting together the shows that we made. But one that has stuck with me was a group of women phoned me and said, we are doing a play about violence in our community. And this was a group of South Asian women. And they said, we would like you to do a show about our play. We're touring it to various community groups. And I said, well, that's wonderful. That's amazing. I'd be happy to do that. And so indeed interviewed many of the women involved in the show. They had written it so that it was a group of women and one man played all the men, and he did a very good job. So we taped lots of scenes from the play. We interviewed the cast, and when I was in editing to put this show together so that it could go to air, I think by theory was that week, I got a phone call from the chair of the board of directors of the community center where these women had developed this play. And the chair says to me, well, you can't run that because we own the play. And I said, how do you own the play? And he said, because these women developed this while they were working in our community center. And I said, you don't own the play. They came to me. These are adult women. They're all over 18. And they said, we want you to run with this play. And so that's what I'm going to do. So I think I had 3 phone calls from the chair who tried to be more and more heavy-handed about how I wasn't going to run this. I think finally I was saying what was true, but not the most persuasive argument in my view. I said, I've also spent all the money that I can spend on this show, this one show. It's gone. And so I have to have something that goes to air. But in any case, we did run the show. And after we did, I got another call from the women who were very happy and who said, thank you for doing that. And thank you for talking to our chair over so many conversations. We couldn't insist like that. We couldn't even insist that we held the rights to our play. But you did that for us, and thank you so much. Well, of course, that was gratifying, and the show got lots of response. which was wonderful. But the main thing that happened for me is I got a lesson in some of the benefits of talking with groups who are not you. That the sum of the parts is always more than the whole is more than each part added together. And in different ways, that experience happened time and time and time again, and still does in other areas of life where I continue to work. I am asking you to think about the lessons learned from the diversity of people you're in communication with, and to continue to benefit from those lessons, and when appropriate, to share those lessons with other people you are working with. And one final story about that. I said that after the discovery of the unmarked graves in BC, I somehow seem to have been catapulted into doing a lot of DEID. That's not by myself, however. My partner in this is a woman from the nation where the graves were discovered. But we discovered each other much, much earlier than that during the Oka standoff, which some of you may be old enough to remember. It was some time ago. She called me during the Oka standoff and said, some women from our nation, which was the Okanagan Shuswap Nation in BC, are doing peace ceremonies behind the barricades at Oka. And she said, I can't interest any mainstream television outlet in doing a story about these peace ceremonies. And this was one of my experiences, and there were several others, in discovering how much easier it is to do stories about war than about peace. That doing stories about peace is very controversial, and all kinds of things happen. However, she was offering the story. We did that, and we have maintained. She worked with me for, about 10 years after that. But very recently, we have been doing the DEID training. And so she also, when she was over 60, decided to go to graduate school. And when she was in her 70s, she got a doctoral degree from UBC. And I kept encouraging her all along and saying, no, you're not too old. You're not too old. Get this done. Get this done. And she now works for Simon Fraser, and she works advising other Indigenous students. And she's a brilliant woman, and this is all quite wonderful. Very recently, though, she sent me an account of a convocation item. She had a student who was graduating with a doctoral degree, who became very ill and who was now basically in bed and dying. So what my friend colleague was able to do, and she sent me pictures of all of this, is she and the dean gathered all of the regalia for this student and the degree itself, and the community in a different room other than her um, sick bed room, but where they were able to hear what was going on. And they conferred the degree. And the main thing that struck me looking at that was how she had been able to modify, evolve the ritual so that it totally worked under those circumstances, and how she had pulled into her script the tall guy who usually did this totally differently. And he was written into the story in a way that I'm sure was hugely meaningful to him, as well as to the recipient, not to mention the community members who were in other rooms. So my third plea is always be aware of the modifications, the evolution of rituals and ceremony and meaning that are appropriate to the communities in which we are working. And that, when I say communities, the S is on purpose, since seldom is there one. Frequently, there are several, but always start from that place where you have an understanding of the authenticity of the life events, whether they are life events that are celebrative or life events that are grief, regardless of what the life events are. If you tap in to where that is real for you and universalizable. Now, when I say universalizable, I don't mean everybody is the same. What I mean is the depth of meaning is the same. And if you get to that place where that depth of meaning is there for you, and then you're moving into your understanding of the depth of meaning for others, that place will be there. So I think that's what I mainly want to say. And it looks like we should take some time now. Yes, since I have been saying things for a half hour, and see if we can have a bit of discussion about these matters, question and answer, and so forth. I'm going to ask Betty Ann to moderate this, since I don't want to miss people, and I inevitably do when looking at these tiny boxes.
So I'll start it off. Can you tell me a time where you may have been off, where you learned the lesson in the most difficult way, where you just weren't able to connect, or you misjudged your audience, or those learning experiences along the way?
I have written a quite long article about, no, actually, I'll be very precise about one occasion. Our company was commissioned to do the Canadian presentation for the World Council of Churches when it met in Canada in 1984. And in case you don't spend all of your time with the World Council of Churches, I will give this bit of background. The assembly meets every 7 years. So the Canadians went to a World Council meeting in Nairobi, where there was an arts event, and they thought that was great. And then they went to an assembly that was in Uppsala, where there was a preach-a-thon to introduce the host country, and they thought that was terrible. So the Canadians, being very clever, said, we want an arts event, and they got our company, Rita Deverell Productions, to produce this arts event. So this is 1984, and it's in Vancouver. And we had created a litany where there were 5 actors, and I was one of the 5 actors. We confessed to all manner of sins in Canadian history. And then the response, which we did with a perfectly straight face, the 5 actors, was, but we are not Americans. So we confessed to sin after sin, but we said, at least we're not Americans. While in early rehearsals, one of my fellow actors, Tantu Cardinal, who's absolutely marvelous and has done many wonderful things, said, but you have to have residential schools in here as a sin. To a person, we didn't know anything about residential schools in 1984. So we put it in the litany because we trusted Tantu. The reason we had this 5 actors as opposed to any other 5 is because we were smart enough to know that everybody's life experience would be useful in our play. Mm-hmm. So that was a time when, and it took years, in fact, and I would say that the general population, since the 215 graves, and when you think of the amount of time that's gone on from 1984 until then, to become reasonably informed about that. The first time I went to Europe, which was for a conference on children's theater. So I'm in my 30s. I had never been out of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And so I'm going to this conference. And at this point, I'm still a proud Canadian. But at that point, I was a proud, somewhat less informed Canadian. And I believed the PR of my new country, that it's always totally welcoming and treats minorities with wonderful, I believed all of that. So I make a very impassioned speech at the international conference to that effect. And someone from Europe raises their hand and says, well, if Canada is so great, how do you account for how you've treated Indigenous peoples? And I didn't know how we had treated Indigenous peoples. But moreover, I never expected to be attacked for Canada being other than tolerant and wonderful. It was a total surprise to this fairly recent immigrant. So that there are a couple of occasions.
Yeah, very good. I have a question from Jill, one of our newer officiants. I was wondering why news coverage on peace is more difficult to get media attention. It's an insight there into media.
What happened in that particular, actually, I'll go back to the one that, in the case of the Oka situation, I was making the complete decision. I didn't need to consult with anybody, so that's what we did. However, earlier or later, I can't now remember the chronology, during the first Gulf War, we did, I was planning to do, I think, 5 peace stories. And the first thing that happened that made it difficult was the sponsors, the commercial sponsors, threatened to pull their commercials from the peace special. They didn't have any problem with whatever it was we were usually doing. So one reason it can become more difficult is because of resources, whether those resources are, in this case, direct commercial resources or some other form of resources. You always have to decide how many times you can afford to be sued. It can't be all the time, or this is a way of talking about resources too, or you'd be bankrupt. And I, from time to time, have been in charge of teams where the reporters, the journalists, the producers, think I'm just being a wimp because I won't do X, Y, Z. And actually, I'm not precisely being a wimp. I'm keeping us from going out of business. So that's another, because you can only take so many risks. So that's the other thing. I also think it has become even more difficult recently. Now, aside from the obvious that we are living in a world with 2 major wars and a number of other less major ones, the proliferation of social media, disinformation, I'll recommend, and maybe you've all seen this, Naomi Klein's book Doppelganger, where she, among other things, there are many things in the book, but she talks about campaigning with her husband, who is running for the NDP in BC. And she is surprised when she goes to a number of, she's knocking on doors, to meet people who she would have thought would be interested in what he has to say, but they have become so subjected to disinformation that they're not. They're basically slamming the door in her face. That's a very personal story, but she's got many broader examples of this becoming difficult. So we are living in a world right now where it's exceedingly dangerous to be a journalist. It's most dangerous for women, and it's most dangerous for people of color. So that's the other reason, and where the not-for-profit public broadcasting sector is shrinking, 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 and under attack. All of that makes it much harder to do things that are peaceful.
Craig, nice to see you. Craig Barlow here.
I remember reading a few years ago that if you could speak more than one languages, it tended to make you a better thinker, more comprehensive thinker. Can the same be said if you have greater knowledge about different cultures, that it makes you a better thinker or a more comprehensive thinker, as opposed to somebody like me who speaks one language and basically is English centered?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and it's a point of view that I have, I won't say automatic sympathy with. Now, speaking another language, and in fact, pursuing or continuing to be involved in the arts, whether as a creator or an audience member, is also supposed to be very good for memory problems, to continuing to learn something, not necessarily a language, but continuing to learn something is supposed to help ward off memory loss problems. Yes, I do think that as soon as we can not rush to sameness, which is a nice tendency, but it is to gloss over differences, which is really what makes people different, and to be able to sit with those differences without saying we're all the same, which means that you're working with more than one idea at the same time. I have advised that in terms of our fallen heroes, such as Sir John A. Macdonald, when the Teachers Federation in Ontario voted to take Sir John A.'s name off schools. That is one action that can be taken, because we now know that he did some terrible things. But my reaction to that was, isn't it the teachable moment for students to be able to find out that he did some terrible things? That there is a bit of nuance to this story. Whereas if we just take it out of our reality, but this involves holding more than one idea about the same thing in one's head at the same time. And that's more complex, maybe like learning another language. And I'm all for learning another language. I did my best for a month this past summer in France, precisely because I'm on the CBC board of directors, And because CBC is in fact operates in 2 languages and multiple indigenous languages, I thought I need to do my best with that as well. Um, so yes, yes, I think it is absolutely broadening um, to be able to uh, engage in several cultural, faith, uh, literally languages, modes of um, uh, modes of thinking, and of course, because of my background, that tends to be, can't we operate in the arts as well as in the sciences, as well as in the social sciences? And all of those are different languages. So thank you for that question.
And I have one here in the chat. Immigration is lately viewed as with less tolerance. How can we as humanists improve the viewpoint? How can we influence the viewpoint in our society, in Canadian culture? And what should we do in order to be more welcoming of immigrants in our community?
That's really, you are right. There are several ideas at the moment that there is a lot of negativity around. And I try most days not to be defeated before I wake up because of this amount of negativity. One is around DEID, diversity, equity, inclusion, and decolonization, which we experienced a great openness to after the George Floyd murder and after the discovery of the unmarked graves. And now there is very noisy talk from the States, but we are not immune, of where DEID is the cause of all of our troubles. It has even been suggested by a political party that it should be illegal to make unconscious bias training or DEI training mandatory in a workplace, because this might cause people to be deeply disturbed, and it will cause all kinds of trouble. So there's one backlash. Another backlash is about immigration. And this comes at the same time that we are, of course, being very pressured in terms of resources, housing, food, for everybody. And instead of dealing with the root causes of that, we're dealing with, well, maybe it's because of all these immigrants. Maybe it's because of all of these international students. Doesn't that feel like something the world has gone through again and again and again?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the Olympics of victimization, which is another very unfortunate thing. As unfortunate as the race to sameness, it goes, my group has had it worse than your group. My group has had it worse than your group. And among the groups who are currently claiming that status are white men. We have had it terribly. And all of these women and all of these people of color are making it really bad for our group. So these things are all happening, and they're happening now, and they're happening in Canada. And I think, in fact, when we think they are only happening in the States, we're deluding ourselves and getting into a trap because we then can't see that it's happening here. And when people like me say it's happening here, then we become ungrateful immigrants who don't love the country enough. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm saying these things because I love the country more. I want us to be able to look these truths in the eye and deal with them for what they are, as opposed to saying, we're not like that, because that doesn't help. To be more welcoming, I think it may have to do with putting our attention on the root causes now and being concerned about disinformation and misinformation. I mean, imagine we have what may be an epidemic of measles, essentially because of anti-vaccine misinformation that is out there. So there are some real backstories to those front stories that we have to be concerned about, I think.
Very good. Martin Frith has a question.
Thank you, Rita, for this engaging conversation. What I wanted to ask was, it seemed that, when Vision TV was launched, in some ways it may have been some of the golden era, if I could say, in broadcasting. And that principle, or looking at the value of intelligent conversation and getting to deeper issues, we really seem to see a dearth of that in contemporary culture. I'm thinking about, the low levels of intelligent conversation that we might see on Parliament Hill, that we see in the news media, that seem to be driven by ideology. And so my question really is, how, looking at where we've come from, how do we it seems from my perspective that we've moved away from getting to deeper issues, and so, is there a path back to intelligent conversation when we're more informed by curiosity rather than making our point? And so, I mean, that's the piece that I feel, so gloomy looking forward, as we see, the lack of public broadcasting, and the, we see even in the print that conglomerates are buying up independent papers. So I'm really curious as to what your take on where our future lies in these conversations.
It really, thank you for that. It really, we are living in very tough times. It, in part, and this won't answer your question, which is how do we get back to that, or actually I'd say forward to that. One of the things that I tell people when I say I'm on the board of CBC is that's not because my life at CBC has always been full of butterflies and rainbows. In fact, rather the opposite. I filed a discrimination grievance against the CBC in the 1980s, I think. And it has taken ages for many things that seem to me obvious to happen there. But the reason I'm on the board is because I believe in the institution. I believe that a public broadcaster is actually important. And I still believe that, regardless of whatever evil may have happened to me 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 40 years ago. I still believe that very much. A good deal of what has gotten us to this bad place is social media. And I think more and more people are realizing that, but I think also not enough people. I have been shocked to attend or tune in on several parliamentary committees where it's quite obvious that the questioners are not asking their question so they can get an answer. They're asking their question so there can be a video clip of that they can promote to their own constituencies. This was obvious to us, I think, in the firing of the university presidents in the States, that they were being hammered away at. It was like the McCarthy era. There was only one question, and the answer wasn't important. It was that this parliamentarian or this congressperson was asking the question. So we need to get serious about the harm that social media is doing. There are some signs of that happening. We need to reaffirm our belief in public broadcasting. There is no free lunch on this one. It has to be paid for, just like Medicare, just like public education. It all has to be paid for. But in the end, I think we win. We save money. We save our souls. But there's so much belief. I attended a wonderful panel at Victoria University on trust in news, or lack of it. And one of the things that the president of Victoria University, I mean Victoria College at the University of Toronto, not the University of Victoria in Victoria, talked about in her introduction was that she had always believed in the positive uses of artificial intelligence. She had worked to develop these kinds of applications, but she had come to the conclusion recently that the dangers were greater than the possible positive effects, and so she was changing her tune. I think there are a whole bunch of things that we need to change our tune about. We need to say, well, we were wrong about that. We were wrong to support all of these social media outlets where people can live their whole lives in their disinformation to where it affects epidemics. So, yeah, I think that is the way ahead, but I see very few signs of our getting there.
Well, one more question, Craig, and then we'll tie up for the day. Thank you.
I like the expression intelligent talk. And in my view, to have intelligent talk with people, whether it's politicians or between friends or between people of different faiths, the fundamental question you have to ask individuals, are you open enough to change the way that you think, your assumptions? And because if you're not open to change, then we can't have in-depth conversations. And I think the vast majority of people are not open to changing some of their basic assumptions that they hold very dearly. And I think that's a big, big stumbling block to the development of the world to a more harmonious place.
Well, I have a knee-jerk agreement with you. The only thing I would add, though, is I think that's a gradual process, that we all can increase our skills over time at being open to change and increase our tolerance for being comfortable with ourselves and different points of view. Because our automatic assumption as human beings is that we are going to convert you to my point of view, whatever that is. Whereas the ability to live with a number of points of view and a number of points of view along the way, the number of times that I told you about going to Europe for the first time and feeling personally attacked that someone thought that Canada had not been perfect. And whenever I come up against there's some way that Canada is not perfect, I really want to be defensive about that. But over the 40 years, 50 years, I have increased my tolerance for, well, yeah, I can live with that truth too. I can sit with that truth, and I can talk to people who know more about that than I do and not feel so defensive. So, why are you bringing that up and ruining my day? So it is I think, developing skill that we almost never get to the end of. We never graduate from that skill. Well, I think we've exceeded our time, haven't we?
Very
Well, on that note, Dr. Deverell, really wanted to say thank you. It's not every day that we have an opportunity to sit and listen to someone who's been recognized and a member of the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame, or a member of the Order of Canada. So the kind of conversation that that you've engaged us in today, I think, is really helpful. One of the takeaways that I'm mindful of is the importance of creating spaces for conversations. And I think that you've modeled today, that kind of curiosity and invitation that we can create spaces for conversations, and that's really what today and all of these webinars that we hold are all about. So thank you. I think I speak on behalf of all of us as I've read some of the comments that we're all going to be richer for having an opportunity to expand our lenses and today. So thank you.
Thank you. And I wish you every success in your work and avocations.
Okay. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye now.